My name is Brett Spear. Uh, I'm the co-director of our Sure Resource Center. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today. Um, we, um, we have Terry Stratton is going to be our presenter today. Terry is a professor here at the University of Kentucky. He's in the Department of Behavioral Sciences. Terry's actually worn a lot of hats in our College of Medicine over the years. He's been very involved with teaching, and he was an associate dean, I think, of our College of Medicine for a number of years as well. Um, is everyone hearing me? Everyone hearing me okay? Is there a problem?
I can hear you, Brett, but your volume's a little low.
Is that a little bit better?
That's a little bit better.
Okay. Well, so sorry about that. So anyway, Terry's going to be talking with us today about responsible conduct of research, which is for many years has been an important topic, but I think it's getting more and more important as time goes on. So he'll be making a presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end of today's presentation. And we ask that you simply put your questions into the Q&A box, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and Terry will be able to answer the questions you might have. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. Just give us a couple of days for us to prepare the webinar and have it posted. And once we do post it, we will send everyone who've registered, we'll send you an email to let you know that it's been posted, and also to share the link. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry and let him get started.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Welcome, everybody. What nicer way to spend a late Thursday afternoon, huh? To talk about research misconduct. So I realize there's some risk to reputation of being known as the research misconduct guy, but I've purposely tried my whole career to avoid any personal experience in the arena. But as Brett said, it's getting to be a more important area simply because I think the boundaries are expanding a bit as to what constitutes misconduct and some of the things that are fall under the sort of the RCR rubric. So see if I can share my slides here, and we'll get started. Let's see. So hopefully you can all see that. So I'm one of the many faculty at UK here that are part of the Sure Research Sure, it says Sure Research Center, should be Sure Resource Center. Sorry about that. But I thought what I'd do today is talk a little bit about responsible conduct of research, but in a way that, hang on here, now I'm having technical difficulties. Okay. Yeah, so my goal here is really not to spend too much time talking about all the ethical perils of research misconduct, plagiarism, data fabrication. You folks all know that. Instead, what I thought I'd talk a little bit more about is some of the areas that are kind of in the fringe that are starting to again kind of be considered as part of responsible conduct of research. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are again, sort of what the expanding realm of what constitutes research misconduct or could. And it's very interesting in the sense that it causes all of us to think that, to realize that even though we consider ourselves, I'm sure, all ethical researchers and scientists, and we would never at all engage in research misconduct, there's actually certain types of things now where potentially bad things could happen to good people if they're not careful. And so I thought we would kind of focus, I'll try and give you some sort of practical advice on where those areas I think are, and also what could be done to sort of avoid, keeping us all on the kind of straight and narrow. So the learning objectives, basically, there's three. We'll first talk about identifying some key types. Then I'll give you a few examples, not too much. It's I was thinking about this earlier, examples of research misconduct. It's a little like reading a cheap dime store detective novel. I mean, it's cheap entertainment, but it's kind of riveting. and so but yet it is fairly rare. But yet I'll provide a few examples, and I'll show you where on the federal website there's full transparency in terms of how the feds and their Office of Research Integrity, how they monitor this and how they police ethical research behavior. And then lastly, I'll throw out a few kind of strategies I've thought about for sort of preventing research misconduct. And again, I would say here, it's not that it's not to sort of get everybody to be ethical, really. I think we're all ethical people. It's really to realize what things could be done to sort of help us avoid falling into sort of pitfalls that might cause us to get a little bit reckless in what we do. Okay, so as you might imagine, the feds, they have policies for everything, right? And so they have a federal policy for handling research misconduct. And I'm not going to show you these. You can click on them, but they are pretty well scripted out in terms of the process that goes on if there is an allegation made of research misconduct. Now, again, this involves obviously misconduct that will be associated with NIH type funding, but certainly your home institution would have its own concerns and safeguards in place about the conduct of research and things like that. So, but the
Terry, are its slides don't seem to be advancing, or are they? I'm not seeing that. Is it?
oh, sorry, hang on.
There you go.
I've got two monitors up, and one of them works and one doesn't. So
Wow, we are having a bad technical day. So
yes, let's see.
you wouldn't know that we've done like a zillion of these, would you?
Boy, let's see. Well, let's see.
It has moved on to purpose, but
Yeah, it's moving on for you. It's not moving for me though. Unless I can move. Let's see. Well, let's try it. We'll try it and go. Um, let's see. Hang on. Let me pick back up here. Okay. Federal policies. Okay. Maybe I'll just look off to my right monitor here and we'll do that. So I'm not trying to be evasive, forgive me. As I mentioned, the federal government, they have a pretty well scripted guidebook on what happens when there is an allegation made of research misconduct, and actually surprises a lot of people to know that it's your home university that actually coordinates a lot of these efforts. If there's an allegation made, the feds simply provide the framework to do that. But most of it is done at the university level, and it's a joint partnership kind of a thing. I don't know if any of you have had experience in being hopefully not the subject of an inquiry, but being part of an official inquiry. It's a fairly displeasurable task. I have not myself. It's a little like though from closest I can tell, it's a little like if you've been involved in any type of with students some type of a cheating or plagiarism type thing, and you get involved in that sort of thing. It's in the end there's kind of no winners. It's not a fun time. But at any rate, it sometimes does happen, and sometimes has to be undertaken, this process. And actually your university is probably going to be more strict than the feds because of what's at stake. And what's at stake is if there's misconduct with NIH dollars, that's a potentially big issue for any university because nothing will make an administrator's blood pressure rise or drain quicker than saying there's a threat of having NIH funding suspended at our institution. So, at any rate, let's see here. No, that's going and that's not. Okay, I have two screens, but only one works. Okay. So the federal guidelines, by the way, are adopted across many different federal agencies. Here's a list of them here. So it's not like every single center or institute or whatever at the federal government or under HHS has its own set of guidelines for how they handle research misconduct. So you kind of get an idea here. They're pretty much on board with across the different centers and the different. You see the DoD here, and there's even the NSF is on here. So there's sort of one standard group of protocols that deal with this sort of thing. A little bit about now. This is something I really didn't know. This was called. So you've all probably know that part of the subpart A of the Health and Human Services guidelines that deals with human subjects protection. We often refer to that as the common rule. Actually, with research misconduct, ORI is a thing they call the final rule. And these policies actually were just updated December of last year, and they went into effect the first of this year. And so they make some revisions to things. And again, there's some topic-specific guidelines here that I've listed for you guys. You can go to their site and look, but it deals with 3 different areas about institutional records. So this is if there is an inquiry for an alleged research misconduct, what universities have to provide the records they have to secure, things like that. And then the last one, there's multiple institutions, and that's if there's happen to be multiple research that involves, I guess, subcontracts across different universities, how multiple institutions might have to work together to work through a proceeding of an inquiry into research misconduct. But again, this is actually fairly rare, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'd like to spend a little more time on just sort of the practical stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at here. Here's what I was mentioning to you guys with what the feds are providing here. This has been updated. Here's something from their annual report, and this is a little bit about their research misconduct proceedings. So this is basically their activity, how they've been policing. This is from 2024. Everything is a year lag, and so basically they had a number of different inquiries, and there were actually let's see, 43. Looks like 119 basically inquiries. A number of them were dismissed or chose not to pursue. Several of them there were no finding of misconduct, and then there were actually 6 that there was some indication of fabrication or falsification of data. And again, on their website they will list people that are cases in which there are current sanctions against people for violations of research misconduct. It doesn't list historically everybody that's ever been sanctioned. It just lists those folks, those cases that are currently under sanction. So there's never a huge number of them, but they do keep it up to date. It's very transparent, everything like that. So anyway, but you can see the number of allegations they received. I mean, 700. That's a lot of things to look through. Most of those they end up not pursuing. But anyway, it's a little bit more activity than one might expect. Let me give you the government-wide definitions for research misconduct. Fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. So you all know what fabrication is. Basically, you're making up your data. Falsification is sort of that middle ground where you're not really fabricating the data, but you are sort of manipulating it in a way that might not be on the up and up. And even though we think that this is not something that we would ever engage in some ways we kind of do it without realizing it, depending on what type of data you have and how much data cleaning you do and different things like that. A lot of things very well intentioned could actually fall under this. So it's something to think about. And then the last one is plagiarism, which you all know what that is. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about a kind of a unique application of that self-plagiarism, which sounds a little bit strange, but this is basically not taking somebody else's ideas or words or whatever, not attributing them. And so it's important to note, though, that research misconduct under the federal rules definitions does not include does not include difference of opinion or error. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit later on about the number of journal retractions that are happening out there. And the vast majority of those really deal with errors in analyses, errors in conclusion, things about the data, things that really get more at get at rigor and reproducibility more than they do about unethical behavior. So you don't worry. It's honest error is something that's if it's not intentional, it's not done knowingly, and it's not done recklessly, it falls under that area of error, which is going to happen because we're all human beings, and we're all busy. We all do a lot of things. So we've all had errors in our research before. We're going to spend most of our time on the falsification because I think that's the area that pertains to most of us, and could actually, again, we could have some unwitting interaction with things that could fall under falsification and not really realize it. So again, I think this is the place where I think that, in spite of it being honest errors, I think it could happen. Most of us would probably be involved or closest to being involved. Research misconduct under the PHS regulations, they require several different standards to be met for research misconduct. A significant departure from accepted practices of the relevant research community. The misconduct must be committed intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. And we'll talk a little bit about what recklessly means, but here's how those are kind of defined there at the bottom. And then lastly, the allegation must be proven by preponderance of evidence. So this is not a reasonable doubt kind of a standard. This is basically a slightly different, the bar is set slightly different for these types of inquiries. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about the intentional and knowing and reckless behavior. To me, the reckless part of it has been added. These have all been updated recently, and this is the area where I think they're trying to provide a little more framework, a little more detail to it, because and if you look back at these, actually at some of these, a significant departure, well, what is that? A lot of these are very subjectively kind of defined things. And so as a result, even though they've tried to provide very tangible, very specific kinds of criteria for what constitutes research misconduct, there's a bit of interpretation there. And so I'll just alert you to this article. This was done a couple of years ago. There may be other things published since then, but this was an attempt to sort of define, okay, well, what's reckless in terms of research misconduct and unethical research. This is a little bit old now, but I put it up because I'm sure that this general finding has not changed any. But if you're sort of new to the area of research misconduct, as I once was, and my thought was when I heard it, that, okay, I'm sure there are rogue scientists out there and people are not playing by the rules of different things. But I sort of thought to myself, I bet a lot of it is assistant professors on tenure. They're stressed. They're in their 5th year before probation. Their probationary period. They're struggling. They're really pressured. They've got bills to pay. They've got, and they're good people that are just pushed to the limit, and they end up doing things they wouldn't otherwise do. Or it's people that don't have enough training. Maybe it's a lot of folks that just don't know, they're not trained as rigorously. Maybe it's people that, again, institutions that don't have access to a lot of the ethical training. And so there's got to be some sort of thing to this, but certainly this is not happening at the big research universities. And actually none of that's true. The examples you see of research misconduct that are documented are really run across the spectrum. And I'll show you a few of these here in a sec. We'll go through these quick because, again, I don't want to sensationalize this whole thing too much, as interesting as it is. But so here's somebody. Now this goes back a couple of years. This is from 2020, and these are just random, by the way. I mean, you can go and find other ones. And these sanctions actually may be over with now. These people might not be on the website any longer. But here's somebody from Harvard. And they were engaged in research misconduct by intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly falsifying and or fabricating Western blot images. Now, as Brett said, I'm a behavioral scientist, so I do human subject research. I do things in education, but I also do things in like addiction, other areas. And so I don't do bench research. And so I really don't know too much about what a Western blot image is or what type of information it conveys. But actually, you'll see a fair number of cases where there has been misconduct or journal article retractions, and then they're related but separate. But they're related to image manipulation, and a lot of the image manipulation seems to be dealing with Western blots. So this is not the first one that you would see if you really dug around. Here's another one. This one I put up there just because this person was actually at NIH. And so they were knowingly or recklessly falsifying or fabricating data in published papers, manuscripts, different things. And you see the bottom there that actually says what the sanction was for the individual. And so, some people agree to have be supervised. Other people agree to to sit out from NIH funding for a given period, different things like that. There are a couple cases, I think, still on their website of NIH that are lifetime bans. These are people that engaged in activities that the feds found so egregious, they decided we don't ever want you competing for our funds ever again. So that is very rare. Usually it's seen as kind of a lapse of judgment, and there's some remediation, some suspension, and some remediation. But the idea is that you can get back on track. It's not a career-ending thing, okay, necessarily. Here's another one. This was okay, 4 years ago now. This is a pretty prominent guy, and this actually involved plagiarism. And this I think, from what I can gather on the facts on this involves actually more recklessness than anything, or carelessness. A grant was put together. There were different players involved. There was nobody, I think, that really did a final review on making sure that everything that was included was appropriately cited. And so, anyway, they got into a little trouble over that one. So, and I think I got one. Let's see. This is Ohio State and Johnson. Yeah. So, I mean, my point is that these are very reputable institutions, and these are people they should have the support and the training to be able to navigate these kinds of things. This is, again, papers, couple of grant applications, different things. And you can see there, this person entered into a voluntary agreement to have his research supervised for a period of 3 years. This is the last one, and I put this in just because this one involves only reckless, the reckless component, falsely reporting human subjects met certain inclusion-exclusion criteria. So for late life depression studies. So this is somebody that was enrolling people who were supposed to meet certain types of criteria, and they weren't, and he was sort of overlooking it or whatever. Maybe he was pressured you've got to enroll so many subjects in your study and you're behind, what's going on. It's tough to say exactly, but anyway. So that kind of gives you sort of an example for types of research misconduct that's out there. Again, it's fairly rare, although there are a lot of inquiries, but most of the inquiries seem like they are not really founded. And so they're looked into briefly and then sort of dropped. But there are some that are pursued. So why do people commit, research misconduct? If we were in a group here, I'd sort of open this up for discussion. But you kind of think to yourself, well, is it a lot of people that are just unscrupulous and they're purposely no matter what they were doing, they'd be doing it unethically. They're just not good people. And I tend really not to believe that so much. I think that it's people that find themselves, I think, probably in extraordinary circumstances, and for whatever reason, they don't uphold the sanctity of science in terms of abiding by the rules of science. And so there's a number of different reasons, and I've run across a number of them. I've heard it said, well, some people just think they know the answer, they know what they're going to find, and so they don't really bother to and check. And so to me, this is more negligence than it is misconduct. But career time pressure is probably another big one that, people engage in. They engage in behaviors they wouldn't otherwise because they just have such pressure. And all of you that are out there, you've got, in addition to doing your research, you teach, you probably got graduate students, other things, you do service work. It is getting, I will say, it's getting harder to be an academic. I mean, it's a lot more is expected now. I've been in the field area a long time, and it seems like the pressures are getting greater rather than lesser. They think it will be, now this would be somebody that would be doing it purposely, that just figures nobody's going to catch me doing it, so I'll do it. I think that's rare, does happen. Um, I'm a social scientist, so I mean, I looked at this and I sort of thought, I'm just seeing some changing norms in science. I mean, it's really slow. It's tough to see a norm change, really. I mean, it's so gradual, but I just think, the pressures on productivity and what's defined as productivity at most universities has changed a lot. To be able for the rules of science and good science, that is ethical science, to be conveyed, there has to be good, that's passed down through mentorship. And I think that there's less opportunity for that sort of thing now. At least, again, maybe I'm speaking more of my own experience, but some of the things that really involve training and mentoring and sort of translation of these scientific values, they're things that are harder to do now. There's just less time to do it, and frankly, they're expected, but they're not really rewarded. And so people kind of do what they're rewarded to do, to be honest. So I asked the question, what's your institution really rewarding? And that may speak to the issue of why these things happen. And here's just a little graphic here. And again, I think competitive pressures, the personal circumstances, I don't think poor supervision may play a role. But I think that inadequate training is probably not that big a deal. I think most of us are adequately trained. And individual psychology, well, I mean, if you're, and again, a lot of this is geared towards students or postdocs. Yes, if you want to impress or to please your mentor, you may do certain things. But again, I think that for those of us that are working out there as independent researchers, I don't think the individual psychology thing would enter up. I mean, I would not see myself doing something like this to press my chair or somebody like that, but it could happen. And again, I say this as a full tenured professor. When I was an assistant untenured professor, the shoe was on the other foot. So anyway, I could certainly understand where a lot of these pressures would come in. I get this question a lot. Is research misconduct increasing? It seems like it is. I hear a lot more about it. I see a lot more about it. That's a tough question to ask. And actually, I don't know necessarily that it has, because if you look at the amount of research that's being done now, I mean, it's grown exponentially. Even small universities that were never really research oriented have some level of research going on. And so research is literally done, I think, at every institution of higher education. And so there's just a lot more opportunity, I think, for, it's a volume thing. There's so much more opportunity for these bad things to happen because there's so much more opportunity. So in terms of prevalence, I think if you probably factored in how much research is actually done versus how many claims or how many allegations of research misconduct, I would think that it probably wouldn't be quite as alarming as some people think. But the other thing is too, is that, there's so many things that have changed now. We're able to see, and there's so many more eyes on your research. With the advent of the internet, there's people now, they call them data sleuths, that basically will go and they'll look through articles and they'll actually try and root out problems, not necessarily misconduct, but problems in analyses, problems in statistics. Some of that actually uncovers data fabrication, where they're saying that this couldn't have happened. If there's a lot more journal oversight. So my point is, regardless of how much the behavior is out there, there's a lot more people. It's being looked at a lot closer. It's a little like the prevalence of a disease goes up when you start screening for it. So I don't know that we're in some type of a crisis mode. I mean, I've heard some people say that science is really at a point of crisis because it's one of our major social institutions like government and religion, and they failed, and now science is failing. And I don't think we're quite there yet. But at any rate, and here's a few sites actually I've listed here. Retraction Watch, which I'll come back to in a few slides, and we'll talk about that. Image manipulation, I mentioned that, and that was actually early on a pretty big area of involvement for a lot of the ORI cases. And this is where a lot of the journals started hiring their own sort of data people to review a lot of the imagery that was being sent in for different types of studies. And wasn't that long ago, actually, 2003, a little, so 20 years ago, the first guidelines were actually published in the journal Cell Biology, which you see here, regarding what you can and cannot do in terms of limitations on image manipulation. So in terms of contrast, brightening. So in other words, if you're going to take your image that you have that conveys something, and you're going to put it in Photoshop and just tweak this or sharpen that, does that actually change the meaning of what's being conveyed in the image? Now, again, I don't do bench research, so I can't comment too much on this, but my sense is that a lot of images that are used from lab work, the clarity, the color, the resolution, all of that conveys certain information. It's not just a case of we'll make this easier to read. So when you start manipulating it, or you start enhancing, quote unquote, an image, are you actually manipulating it in a bad way? So something to consider anyway. This is pretty small. I know most of you probably can't see this. You can go to the NIH website and find this. This talks a little bit about can you spot? These are images. And so if you look at they give you 4 little examples here. Here's actually a Western blot, figure 3. And it talks a little bit down here about what the problem is. And so for this one here, I know this was, I think the only one I got correct was the figure 2. Come on, get that out of there. Figure 1 and 4 are the same images, they're just transposed. And so anyway, and some of these others too, this one was sharpened up a little bit, but you get the idea of images and sort of what's what's looked at. Some possible red flags for, again, this is from the federal government here. This is from ORI. There's really no smoking gun, so to speak, for a lot of research misconduct. I mean, some of it can go on for quite a long time before it's actually revealed, depending on how it's being done or what type of oversight there is on the person. But here they list some possible red flags. And so they say, okay, if the results are too good to be true, if the findings can't be replicated, well, we know that's kind of a larger problem in science, hence the whole rigor and reproducibility emphasis from NIH, is that there wasn't enough detail being provided in what was being published in terms of the studies that somebody could actually take it, replicate it, and get the same results. And so that is kind of troubling, because science, if nothing else, should be systematic, and it should be replicable. And so there again, I would say that's more of a fault of larger things. But again, these are possible red flags. But yeah, data being too good to be true, depending on the area you work in, you may get findings that are just almost unbelievable. Might be something to look at. Lack of transparency. So these are things that if you are a supervisor and you're supervising graduate students or postdocs in the lab, and keep in mind, they may feel some pressure to impress you, or they want to be successful in your eyes. And they may, see skirting some of the rules as being worth it in terms of gaining your admiration or your respect or whatever. So understand the position that they are in. I mean, it's not. I think it's rarely a case they don't know better. It's just that they are pressured and they feel immense pressure to do other things. And so again, transparency is a big thing. All of that. Let's see what else. I think we've covered that pretty well. I mentioned this a little bit. A lot of the journals now have what they call data integrity, research integrity czars. It's kind of an interesting term. A lot of these are ex-scientists that go on. Some of them are journalists that have a scientific background, and the journals employ them to basically give kind of an initial scrutiny to certain types of articles and things that come in. Um, Ivan Oransky, who is right up here, he's actually the founder of Retraction Watch, which we'll talk about. Oransky's an MD. He's not a practicing MD, but he's an MD who works as a medical journalist. And he's taken it on really as his quest in life, I think, to document all of the particularly retractions in science that are happening around the world. And I'll cover those in just a sec. By the way, I was going to mention too, most NIH centers and agencies and institutes have somebody at them that is sort of responsible for data integrity, research integrity. Now, that may not be all they do, but for example, NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, if you're working on a NIDA-funded project and there's some issues or something like that, or you've got questions, there probably would be somebody to contact, NIH, NIDA would have somebody who sort of that's their area that they deal with. Now, I'm not suggesting that be your first line of that be your first course of action would be to contact NIH if there were a question here. But I'm just saying that even though they have, even though ORI exists at the federal level, most of the individual centers and institutes have people as well. So certainly if you had a question, I think you could contact somebody. Here's something else that's kind of a whole another wrench that's being thrown into things. And this really indirectly, I think, relates to research integrity because it places well-intentioned scientists in a bad spot. I mean, now there's 20,000 journals considered predatory. I guess in my field, I work in a fairly specialized area. I mean, just the fact that there are 20,000 journals at all is surprising. And to think that there's obviously more than that because there's this many that are not really legit. And so as a responsible scientist, how do you decide what's a good place to disseminate your research? And are you going to get caught up in something that you're unaware of, where you're submitting to a journal that has very lax peer review or whatever, or they are just plain a paper mill? There's a lot of examples of entire journals being, pretty much questioned about the quality of what they're publishing. So this is something. I mean, when I started out as an academic, this was really not an issue. I mean, the journals you had were all reputable. Some were better than others, and some had higher impact factors and different things. But now it's really tough to know what's legitimate and what's not. So anyway, something else to keep in mind is if we didn't have enough to keep ourselves on the straight and narrow with regard to our research practices, now we've got to factor in this sort of thing. Social media is a big. I alluded to this a little bit earlier about there's a lot more. Everything now that is disseminated ends up on the internet, and if it's on the internet, everybody in theory has access to it, or a lot of people. So the internet's, again, I've always said, has been sort of a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but of course it's pretty much still the wild, wild west in terms of quality, what's out there. And so, but anyway, the social media has had some very good effects and some not so good effects. But Retraction Watch is the blog I just mentioned, and this is Oransky's thing, and you can go there and look. And he actually has a database you can download, which I have a screenshot of here in a couple slides I'll show you. It's going to be too small to read, but it gives you an idea of what level of effort they're putting into this. But this is really quite amazing to me. I mean, worldwide, okay, this is an all science, all published type things, okay? Since now, his database really only goes back to the mid-70s. Prior to that, there were a handful of retractions, but really it all starts about 75. But since 77, there's been 68,000 journal retractions, articles retracted worldwide. And it's not randomly distributed, by the way. There's a lot that come from certain countries. Most of them, though, have been research papers that have been either corrected or redacted based on data issues. Or I'm sorry, most have been research papers. I was going to say there are some book chapters in there as well, too, that have been redacted. But for U.S. authors since '77, there have been 4,100. Since 2020, there's been 1,100. 63 since 2020 for data falsification. Most of the retractions are due to errors in reporting, errors in conclusions, errors in different things, where the data just the study just doesn't have any integrity, and so they're retracted not because of misconduct, but because really of a poor quality control. And I'll show you this in a sec, but when articles are retracted, they are sort of disavowed, and they're actually reassigned a new PubMed number, different things. I mean, they're labeled. They're not actually removed from circulation. They're just stamped as being redacted. So the onus is still on you as a consumer of research to, if something is out there that it should be clearly labeled as redacted, you should approach that cautiously. Since 2020, there have been 26 retractions for plagiarism of U.S. authors. So again, not a huge amount, but more than you would think. But I mean, on a national scale, you could certainly see where some people would say science is really being assaulted here. I mean, in terms of, I mean, if you can't believe science, who can you? Here's an Excel shot. Again, it's very small, I know, but you can see. This is Aransky's. He's got the title of the article, the subject, the institution, the journal. He's got the publisher. Now these are just selected out by US. I just picked these out, but you can actually download this pretty easily. Again, I don't know how often. I'm assuming it's updated pretty often because there's 60-some thousand entries in it. So it's again, I point out that this is now being something that's monitored, and people say, well, gee, look at the scope of this. Clearly, it's getting to become an epidemic problem. Well, it may have been before too. But now we have the means to actually assess it and compile it and share it and do all of that. So we're aware of it. But anyway, I don't want to downplay. It is kind of alarming from a standpoint of a scientist. When I was trained, it was sort of like this is something that is sacred. You would never consider this. It seems like, for lack of a better word, science has become more of a business now, and sort of business. You've heard the old joke about business ethics being one of the oxymorons that's out there. If you have at your institution a plagiarism checking device, it's not a bad thing. NIH, I think at UK they provide this to some degree at my institution. But I think NIH as well, for certain grants, this obviously before you send it in, this is sort of a way to check to see that, in fact, if it does notice information that looks like it's plagiarized or replicated, that it's been appropriately cited. It's not plagiarized if it's cited or cited correctly. And so this is a good way to kind of check to make sure that nothing is getting by, that numerous people can edit grants at once and different things, and somebody could put something in and think, I'm going to go back to it and I'll add that citation later. I've got a really good quote I'm going to put in. I'll go back and add the citation later, and then they never do. And then it ends up in the grant, and all of a sudden you've plagiarized. And so now under the guidelines, you could be guilty of reckless or research misconduct. So where am I on time? I'm getting done. Okay. Here's an interesting one, self-plagiarism. I don't know quite how to explain this, except that this is the changing norm of science. When I was trained as a student, and this was, again, eons ago, we were taught that if you've got a large data, and again, this area I work in, we have large data sets, that you should get as many publications and research questions out of that data set as you can. That's a good thing. You're using the data efficiently. Okay. Now that's kind of looked down upon, and they call it salami data segmentation or salami slicing. So what this involves is where you've got a big data set. You do one paper where you look at men, one paper you look at women, then another paper you combine the two, and you look at some little interaction. Each time you add a variable. And again, this makes more sense, I think, in large scale kind of survey research than it does probably in lab research. But another one here, duplicate publication. Actually, a lot of articles that are retracted are actually done because they appear in more than one place and the similarity is too great. And so this is people taking it to an extreme where we'll title it this way, one for one journal, we'll send it to another one, maybe we'll tweak a little something, we'll call it something else. And they basically looked and said, you can't do that. Data aggregation. So you have some small pilot data set, you publish that, then you collect more data, you add to that, you publish some more. These are all areas, again, where you're kind of stretching the boundaries of what is advancing the knowledge base of science rather than just expanding your own CV. Let's see. Here's an interesting one, text recycling. So one of the postdocs we have at UK, he works in a lab where they do psychopharmacology things. They work with addiction. And so they get a lot, they're actually a very prolific in terms of what they publish, a lot of stuff. And he was joking to me and he said, I'm really running out of descriptors to describe the same methods of our study because I don't want to get accused of replicating or self-plagiarizing. So it's the same study, the same design, the same everything, the same methods, but I can only describe it so many ways and have it be different. And I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I think that, you all remember you'd read papers where the methods section would be 2 paragraphs and it would say the methods in the study have been described elsewhere, and then they'd cite the paper. So you'd have to go and get a paper to see what the methods were. The journals bore part of the responsibility for that because they didn't want to use up editorial space. But now with everything being kind of virtual, that should not be an issue anymore. But I would think here there has to be some reasonable ground between, if you write a good method section and it conveys the methods of your study and you get more your data and you get more than one paper out of it, seems like you should be somewhat permitted. My thing would be if you're going to reuse it or recycle it, as they call it, be sure and cite. Just be transparent. And then copyright infringement here. This is one where self-plagiarism, usually it's an ethical issue that you're using stuff you used before and you're not acknowledging that you've used it before. But if you signed over copyright for that information, you could actually be violating the law because now you don't own it. And so you're using it and it's somebody else's. So there could be a legal infringement as well with some of this, with self-plagiarism. Here's something you can, there's a link here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with these different techniques, but p-hacking. There's a thing called harking, which now p-hacking is basically you're going to arrange all your variables in such a way where you finally get that P05, that magical value where something is significant. Harking is actually where you find a relationship, and then after you find it, then you make the hypothesis. Then you generate, so it makes science seem like it's a lot more linear than it is. Like you had this idea, you gathered the data, you studied it. In fact, could be you had the data, you went and snooped around, you found it, then you posited the hypothesis. So anyway. So what can you do to prevent research misconduct? Now, again, I would say here, let's focus on the recklessness aspect rather than the intentionality in different things and knowingly. What can we do to avoid being reckless in our data? Because, I mean, I'm embarrassed by errors I make in that, but the last thing I want somebody to think is that I'm unethical or that I'm guilty of research misconduct. But there is a threshold at which, according to the feds now, where if you pay so little attention to the potential ramifications, you could actually be sort of liable and negligent. It's not just an honest error, that you're actually being sloppy or careless. The biggest thing I could say is with your rigor and reproducibility part of your grants that you put in, certainly focus a lot on showing how your data are going to be how you're going to sort of at least be transparent about things. Now, there's nothing in the rigor and reproducibility part that deals specifically with what I'm going to show you that I'm going to be an ethical scientist. That's a given pretty much. But you certainly can say how you're going to minimize the chance of being reckless, in my opinion. And that's where I think that this is where the whole research misconduct things comes to potentially affect all of us. Because it's not about really ethics so much. It's about just kind of getting careless, looking the other way when you should be more focused, things like that, and bad things can happen. So this is from the federal website as well, rigor reproducibility.
Terry,
Yeah.
we're getting close to the hour. I don't know if we want to try to leave some time for Q&A, so maybe if we can try to wrap things up a little bit.
Sure, I'm pretty close to the end here. I'll just include these. Here's some scientific reasons for retractions. If you know why things are being retracted, you sort of know where to be sensitive in terms of your own effort. So I would just say a few things. A number of journal articles get retracted because of authorship debates. So, these sorts of things. I think a lot of these are common sense, but sort of, again, take a look at them, be careful. My big thing is that if you're in doubt, just document the heck out of everything. Keep records. If you get contacted for somebody that's requesting data because of an investigation, the last thing you want to say is, yeah, I'll see if I can find that. It's around here somewhere. I mean, you want to be able to say, yeah, I know where that is. I'll get it to you by the end of the day. So anyway, I'll stop there.
All right. Great.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you very much, Terry.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. It's a complicated issue, and like you said, there's a lot of gray areas.
Sorry, go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say, just to remind everybody, we will post the YouTube video. We don't provide the slides, but we will post the YouTube video on our YouTube channel in several days, so you can review the issues here at a later time at your convenience. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I wanted to make a couple of comments since I have a meeting at 4. One of the questions that's come up a bunch of times, and this is in the Q&A, is about use of generative AI for both text generating and writing papers and for image adjustments. So what I would say that a lot of this is allowed under some circumstances, and all journals now have policies of what is and is not permitted. So if you're curious about that when you're submitting somewhere, make sure that you understand what the journal's rules are, because we do have, as a journal editor, I mean, we do have really sophisticated tools now for spotting manipulation and plagiarism and stuff. So a lot of these things are allowed, but you do, as Terry said, you have to be transparent about what it is that you've done. So if you've used something like a generative AI tool for editing your text and stuff, you say that somewhere, you disclose it in the paper so people know that you did that. Image stuff is a lot harder, and I would strongly recommend that you do not use a generative AI for image adjustments, because one of the issues there is it's not transparent as to what the generative AI tool is actually doing with the images. So if something goes awry, you really don't know what's happened. Whereas at least in the text, you can see that, oh, this might be wrong and you can fix it, or this reference is incorrect, but you really don't know what these things are doing with images. So I would say that you should not do that. Even though some journals do technically allow some tweaking, I would say that don't. You're really in a dangerous area with that.
Yeah, and I purposely avoided AI just because it's such a fast-moving target. I really wasn't sure. Whatever we would discuss now would probably be changed in a week. So you raise a good point, Paul. I mean, it's out there, and it's something to contend with. So
yeah, I think the issue is with something like rigor and reproducibility, right? I don't see how, as the tools are changing and how training sets are evolving for images, that it would be so hard for some, even with the same data that you have or the same starting images, for someone else to reproduce an image that you generated. Basically, even if you went back 2 weeks later and tried to do it, you might not be able to. So, I mean, I think that just creates a whole set of problems, and you're probably best avoiding it. Text is different, though, and that you can use. And one of the things I will say really quickly, which is incredibly useful, is that at the publishing level, the generative AI tools have been incredibly useful for helping people edit, because so many people have English as a second or third language, and we've been seeing a huge decline in number of papers that require extensive English language editing. And for that, it has been an incredible boon for people, but you still have to report that you're using it.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We have time for a few questions. A lot of the questions did deal with AI, so I think we've covered a lot of that. I will say, if we don't have time to get to your question or you need some more clarification, you're always welcome to email us at the Resource Center. It's sure, SURE, .rc at uky.edu, and we'll get your question answered. Here's an interesting question that came up early, and I'll share this. If falsification includes omitting data or results, what about investigators or sponsors not publishing negative results? Could that be considered falsification?
Boy, that's a good point. I mean, journals have a bias against publishing non-significant quote unquote results. But certainly like in the private sector, I mean, there's, if you're being, big pharma has a reputation for sharing certain things and not others. And there's been a lot of placebo research actually that's been done based on data that have been obtained through the Open Records Act from pharmacy companies that they didn't publish, that was not complementary to their particular medicine. So the other thing is, I would say, is depending on the area you work in, dealing with missing data and using different methods to impute missing data. For example, if you use scales, very complex scales that may have 20 items, if you have somebody that didn't respond to one item, you don't want to throw out that whole respondent just because of that. So there are ways that you could legitimately do that, but then the point becomes, at what point are you just imputing missing? Are you filling little gaps, and at what point are you creating data? So that's a whole ethical issue too, and that's something, if you use anything to impute missing data, you be very transparent about what you've done, how much you've done, and I would even argue run the analyses both ways, with and without, and show that in fact you've done this, but it hasn't altered your findings.
Okay, I will make one more comment, and I really do have to go. This is on this question. So that I think the issue that Terry's talking about is really, it depends on why you're not using the data that you're not publishing. So there are different levels of this, right? It's like whether or not the data just aren't good quality and you don't use it for that, or it's a case of, I did this experiment 20 times and it worked once, and I'm publishing the work once. So in which case, that would be ethically dubious, to say the least, right? So it's a matter of whether you have experiments that you can't publish because it didn't come out well. There's all kinds of reasons why it's underpowered. But if you're concealing something, that's different, right? And sometimes that can be a fine line. But again, like as Terry said, I mean, the best defense against this is being transparent and saying everything. I always tell students when I'm teaching data analysis and everything, it's like, you can do whatever you want with your data analysis as long as you're completely transparent and people can look at it and say, this is stupid what you've done. You can't do that. And that's fine. You've been transparent. You haven't tried to trick people with your data analysis. You said I did this. And when people look at it and say, okay, you did that, but that's wrong. And that's fine. You're still being out there with it, right?
If you're transparent, it becomes a difference of opinion.
Right.
And if you're not, then it becomes...
Right. And people can always disagree and say, I don't think you've interpreted this correctly because of X, Y, and Z. And you can say, well, that's just your opinion. I put it all out there and you can see it. Right. All right. I got to go, guys. Great talk, Terry. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. Well, just a couple more. Again, I understand people, if they have to move on, that's fine. We'll just do a couple more questions and then we'll have to end for the day. But Terry, do you know anything about RCR training? What are best practices for face-to-face RCR training? I'm not familiar with what's out there, but are you?
For well, I like at UK here, we use the CITI.
Right.
And I think I think a lot of universities use that. There are different modules you can pick. So depending on what type of research you do, if you do animal research or human subjects or whatever. And I'm sure that they probably all include some sort of boilerplate thing on ethical research ethics and research misconduct.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Khan Academy may have some stuff. But in terms of, what you can rely, we rely on this as being, our university relies on an external vendor that's been kind of vetted. So,
But CITI would be a good place to maybe start to look there.
yes, that's where I would look. I think that's a lot of universities use that.
What about if you have a grant writer who's maybe helping you write the proposal, should that person be acknowledged in the grant? Is that something that you would think is required? Or, I mean, we have a proposal development office here at UK that helps us with our grants, and we don't generally acknowledge them. They provide valuable service. I don't know if it's something that it's expected that that person would be should be acknowledged necessarily.
That's a good question. I think for grants, it's probably not essential. I mean, if it were me, I would certainly, send them a nice gift or something, or at least I would acknowledge them that way. I think it's a bigger issue for things that are publishable, that are out there, that once they get in the public, the grant thing, it goes to NIH, it goes to the study section, that person's effort is not really being hidden all that much. But I think it's a much bigger issue when you talk about something where copyright is signed over, and then it's like, hey, I put a lot of effort into this and I got no recognition at all. So it's a little bit of a gray area. I don't think NIH has any rules against using medical writers or things to help you polish your. So
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. We passed a few minutes, and again, there's a few comments that people had about their own experiences, and we appreciate that. Like I said, if you do have questions, feel free to contact our resource center, and we'll do the best we can. And thank you very much for your participation. Thanks, Terry, and thanks for our interpreters. Appreciate everyone, and everyone have the rest of a good day. Thank you.
I hope folks found this useful.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Terry.